So sit any comfortable way. And today we're going to have a discussion about the yoga tradition. The yoga tradition. I guess when we look around us, wherever we may stay or visit, we find there are so many yoga traditions. Even in this faraway place of Australia, in this faraway state of wherever our state may be, I don't know where you all come from, I'd like to ask you, but yeah, there's so many yogas. Yoga is being taught according to this way, that way, another way. So many systems of yoga available. So we begin to wonder, what is this yoga? And how can there be so many different types, different styles of yoga, and people putting their own name to it? This is Joe Smith yoga, this is this yoga, that yoga, isn't it? So we begin to think, well, what is this yoga? And then some people again think that yoga is a religion, some kind of Hindu religion or Buddhist religion, or yeah, there's that identity as well. But those are just, what do you call, names, identifications. They are not really true in the long term, but maybe in the immediate sense, you know, we find so many new styles of yoga with so many different names. But in this talk, we want to go back and kind of get an idea, because we cannot understand completely, we don't even have the time frame for how ancient is yoga. But we want to go back and just have a look and just get an idea. And maybe, at least for me, a little respect for systems that have stood the test of time, that have proven themselves over millennia. So much so that it has come down to us, you know, in this year, you know, of 2017. So we're going to look at the tradition of yoga as it has, just kind of briefly, but to get an idea how it has developed and how it has reached us in this modern time. And also, in looking at the antiquity of yoga, to answer a few questions for us and maybe for people who may come to us, because many people, they ask, and they also judge that, well, yoga is a religion, isn't it? Well, yoga belongs to a religion, doesn't it? And then they say, but we're of this religion, and so yoga is not appropriate, because yoga is of that religion, right? But the masters have always said, and perhaps you will agree after this talk, that yoga is not a religion. It was never a religion. It had never had anything to do with religion. First off, it's not a religion because yoga evolved from such an ancient time that there was no known religion then. So how can you say it's a religion? It came from a time before all the religions that we know, all the fighting and things going on. Yoga came way before all that. So yoga doesn't belong to any of that. Although yoga has evolved through many different systems, many different traditions, have adopted yoga, have brought yoga under the umbrella of that tradition and utilized the practices to further their tradition. And in this way, different yogas have also developed. So we will look at that, but also from the viewpoint that yoga is its own tradition, and it's really more of a science than a religion. Of course, there's so many aspects of yoga. It's so vast. Yoga is so vast. So there is also a devotional aspect of yoga too. And when there's devotion, we think of religion. But the devotion that is practiced in yoga is a little bit different in the sense that, well, yoga allows you to have devotion to any name of God, any form of God. It doesn't say, you have to believe in this God only and you can only worship this God. It does not say that, ever. And yoga says, choose whichever one you like. That's the exact terminology, the one that you like. And that one will work best for you. So what religion says that? So even the devotional aspect, it really doesn't fit. So we'll begin to look at the evolution of yoga from the ancient times. The very earliest teaching of yoga is said to have come from the tantric culture, the ancient tantric culture, and that's not the renaissance of tantra, which happened much later. And don't try to write anything down. It's complicated. Just get it, an idea. So from the early tantric period, which is written here 65 BC, but really it must be much, much older than that. But to get these timelines, these dates, is very difficult when you go back in time. So this is just, kind of a speculative number. So, but say, around 6500 BC, the early tantric period was flourishing, and that at that time, Tantra was not a religion either, but it was a world culture. It was a culture existing on a continent that is no more, which we call Gondwana land, which used to circle the whole globe. And it was a very huge continent. And so yoga was the one body of practice in the tantric culture. And so from that point of view, yoga was a universal science. Because this Gondwana land, which later on broke up due to, all these what you call tsunamis and cataclysms, it broke up. Some part of it attached on to India and some parts to Africa and that. So it was no longer one continent mass any longer. So before it broke up, when yoga was the body of practice in Tantra, we can say it was a universal body of practice, universal system. And yoga wasn't Tantra, but yoga were the practices in Tantra. And then again, the yoga that we know today is not encompassing all the practices that existed in that culture of Tantra, because Tantra was a very accepting culture. It accepted absolutely everything. The good, the bad, the wonderful, the terrible, everything was included in Tantra. So yoga was one body in Tantra. And Tantra, again, was based on Shakti. And this is what we see in yoga. Shakti means energy. So Tantra is based in Shakti, energy, and also, of course, Shiva, consciousness. In Tantra, there's Shiva Shakti. But Tantra really reveres Shakti. If you've ever been to India, that aspect of Tantra is still very much alive there and followed there. And so we see this emphasis of Shakti in yoga. See, the different yogas that we practice today and we find so useful, they are the ones that came from Tantra. For example, Hatha Yoga. When we practice Hatha Yoga, maybe we think, hey, my body is improving, I'm more flexible, it's looking better, I'm more healthy, and all that does happen. But why does it happen? Because of the Shakti. Each practice works on the energy within the body. The energy fields, the energy channels, the energy centers, They all get toned up, rebalanced through the yoga. This is the real yoga. The real yoga is not just this physiological thing that we've been introduced to. It is energetic in nature, and that's why when we practice it, we feel better. We feel better, and we don't know exactly what's happening, but we feel better, and we think we better go next week for our next fix. Isn't it? Because it keeps us rolling. Yeah. So, the early yogas, they had this emphasis of Shakti. So Hatha Yoga, Kundalini Yoga. Have you heard of Kundalini? Kundalini, the awakening of the spirit energy, the cosmic energy, Kundalini Yoga, chakras, all these things. These came from Tantra. And then, as it is, the times change. The situation changes. We can see so much change in the world, even in our time, isn't it? From year to year, we can see changes, vast changes. Some of us who are older can see many changes, from the time we were younger. So it is with yoga also. And the tantric period was slowly shifted into the pre-Vedic period. And that period was from 6500 to 4500 BC. And still, the yoga was carried up. Then the yoga started to be removed from Tantra because Tantra was losing its reputation. It had too many things which were not acceptable. I told you in Tantra there was everything. The good, bad, the terrible, the wonderful, everything was there. So there were too many things that were not acceptable, and the Vedic period was a very ethical period. It was a period of dharma. Have you heard of dharma? Dharma means the right thing, the right path. The path that leads to the welfare of all, the spiritual evolution of all, the harmony of all, something like that. So the Vedic culture was a very dharmic culture. And they could not accept many of the things in Tantra, honestly, because some of the things were a bit, over the top. So, and I won't go into it now, but... So they already started to pull out the more useful things and keep them under their umbrella. So things like meditation, Tantra was very good in meditation, actually. And things like Kundalini Yoga, Hatha Yoga, they pulled these things out straight away because they said these things are good for us. We can use them in our tradition too. So they pulled out the things they thought they could use, kept them in the umbrella of their tradition, and called them by the name of yoga. So Dhyan Yoga, meditation, Hatha Yoga, the exercises, Kundalini Yoga, chakra, all these things they kept. And then from pre-Vedic to Vedic period, again, more changes. The Vedic culture became more established in the whole Indian subcontinent, because we can really only look at India now, because the part of Gondwana land that broke off, it joined India. So then Tantra became aligned with the Vedic culture in that way. So 4500 to 2500 BC, the Vedic period was getting established, the Vedic culture, and the Dharma. It is called Sanatan Dharma. It is not exactly a religion, but some people think of it like that. It's really more of a culture. But it is a culture that is based on Dharma, the word Dharma, which means universal harmony, universal order, for the welfare of all. Then the Vedic period also, had its time, and it also succumbed to the Buddhist. At a certain time, from 2000 to 1500 BC, Buddhism became very, very popular, and the Buddhists rejected the Vedic concepts, the Vedic ideals. So more changes happened, and in this Buddhist period, there was a very great emphasis on meditation. In Buddhism, if you go to Buddhism, what will you learn? There's only one thing you'll learn. Do you know what that is? Have you not been to any Buddhist thing?
Meditation. Watch the breath.
That's it. You'll learn what?
To watch the breath.
You'll learn to watch the breath, you'll learn to watch the mind. Yeah, you'll learn meditation. And that's their focus. So all the practices of Dhyan Yoga, they came into the Buddhist culture. And the Buddhists maintained them. And they called them by their name now. The practices are no longer, of yoga are no longer Vedic. Now they're Buddhist. See, this is how yoga has developed. Imagine that. So you see, it's quite easy to put your name on something. You too may do it one day. Okay, so then the Buddhist period had its rise, and then also a bit came down a bit. So say from 1500 to 1000 BC, the Upanishadic period started. And Upanishadic period was known for Dhyan Yoga. Dhyan Yoga. That was their important gift. They gave, the knowledge. And it wasn't knowledge of the world, mind you. It was knowledge of the self, the soul, the consciousness. And who am I? That was the important thing. So they also had their practices, and that's why in many of the Upanishads you can find yoga practices. And you might think, what are they doing there? You can find asana, pranayama, chakra, all these kundalini, all these things there. In fact, there are also yoga Upanishads. And they are amongst the most ancient written teachings of yoga. So, the Upanishadic teachers, the rishis, the seers, they too utilized yoga. But they used it in order to discover the self. They didn't want powers, they didn't want, name and fame. They wanted to discover who am I, and that is Dhyan Yoga. And they used the practices for that purpose. And develop the yoga also, which was particularly associated with know thyself, how to know thyself, how to meditate and know thyself. They practiced a lot of meditation. But it wasn't just Dhyan Yoga, it was Jnana Yoga. So Jnana Yoga and Dhyan Yoga. And they had also specific forms of meditation. If you read the Upanishads, you can see that. The Upanishads are really ancient teachings, which include yoga, but which also explain, spiritual life from the Vedic perspective and from the perspective of Dharma. And then came the epic period. Have you heard of the Ramayana and the what is it? Mahabharata. Yeah, these are the great epics. From 1000 to 100 BC, some very great wars were fought, which changed also a little bit the direction of yoga, and definitely which changed the direction of the Vedic culture. So the epic period also had its effect on yoga. And then began the classical period from 100 BC to 500 AD. And this is when the classical texts on yoga were written down. That doesn't mean that the knowledge in these texts comes from that period. But it was the first time in a long history when things could be written. They had developed the language, the resource, and the capability to write down the teaching. And before that, the teaching had still been transmitted for thousands and thousands of years. Imagine this. The same teachings that you are learning had been already transmitted down by word of mouth, from the mouth of the teacher to the ear of the student. All the teachings used to be given in that way. And so, the student had to prove himself very capable, very worthy. Why? He had to remember everything. That's why I always tell you, don't bother writing anything. Because see, whatever you write gets thrown in the bin. But what you remember, that's of value to you. You understand? Yoga was originally transmitted like that. From teacher to student, down through the ages. And the student proved himself or herself worthy by remembering it. By remembering it. And how much they could remember. So finally, by this time, the classical period, who could remember, then had to be more worthy and learn how to write. Because then they were developing, the alphabets and the letters and how to write, put ideas into writing. And many of these classical texts were written, in very short form because writing was difficult. It was hard to get paper. They didn't have paper. What did they write on? They wrote on metal, rock, tree bark. Yes, and then often they couldn't store it because they lived in huts. So they kept it in the ground. Imagine this. Yeah, and that's how these classical texts came down to us. Yeah, we take for granted all that we have in this technological era, but wasn't always like this. Yeah. So then, classical, then after the classical period, when the teachings mainly from the Vedic, Upanishadic, Buddhist periods were being written down, then they started to write down the teachings from Tantra. Because it took a long time, due to the unsavory aspects of Tantra, along with the savory, of course. So due to those, there was a bit of a rejection happening about the Tantra. You know how society is. We are Vedic. We do not accept that. Like that, there was a bit of that. So, yeah, so by this time, 500 to 1300 AD, that's quite a lot further ahead in time, right, from 6500 BC. So we find, that the texts, this Tantra Renaissance period is when they wrote down the knowledge that could be remembered. A lot was lost. I hate to say how much was lost. It's horrific to think. So they wrote down, but because they wrote down what they could remember, because there were, Tantra yogis, there were tantric munis and practitioners, so there was a knowledge of Tantra even then still. So they did their best to write down, and they came up with some important texts which are available. But the thing is that they're all in Sanskrit. And so if you want to read them, it's pretty hard. And then again, the Sanskrit will have to be translated, and it'll get translated into Hindi, and then it'll lose a lot. And then it'll get translated from the Hindi into the English by some American who doesn't really know anything but thinks he knows everything. And so by the time you get it, it's like, oh, can't make any sense out of that. That's what I find. Because I've been working on these texts all my life, so some of them make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And they are not true to the original at all, either. They just make up something when they don't understand, put that in. Yeah. So anyway, Tantra Renaissance period, that's when they wrote down. It is not the time when this knowledge and these practices came into existence. Just always remember that, because otherwise you'll feel very confused. But telling you this time frame, you may think is useless, but when you start to study, you will have questions. Well, how can that be there? How can that be there? How can they call yoga Vedic? And you think, I thought it was tantric, I thought it was just yoga. Well, now you'll have an idea how that is. You know, if you do choose to study yoga and keep moving with it through your life, because I feel it's very worthwhile to do that. You learn so much. You learn so much. But anyway, so then from there we have the sectarian period. And this sectarian period is what we could call religion. Now see how late that comes. 1300 to 1700 AD. This is when religions started to form from the Vedic, Tantric, Upanishadic knowledge, Buddhist knowledge. And so we have religions like, I don't know, have you heard Shaivism, Shaktism, these Vaishnavism, these religions formed. And they became immediately very popular with the people, because you see, the people love it. The people love image. So each religion had their image. So if it was Shaktism, oh, there were beautiful images of Ma. Oh, how we love Ma. Every form of Ma, you know, all decorated and smiling, lovely. And you sing and chant and repeat her mantra and offer her flower and get blessing of Ma. Oh, the people loved it. And then there were images of Shiva, who is God really. But God depicted as a yogi. You're sitting in Padmasana like this, well, wonderful, you know, you can go and pray. And God has a form then, because when we go to church and pray to God, it's so, I know, so difficult. Because where is the God that I'm fervently trying to, you know, speak with and talk to, but I can't see him or her, whatever it is. But here, there's God. Just like a yogi, like a person. So easy. Make some little offering. And then there's the lingam. You know, you can make some offering to that, some flour and some different things, pour over. And you get the connection with God. See, religion is popular for that reason. It's an easy way for ordinary people. All the other, you know, thinkers and meditators, they don't need these forms, you know, so much, because they're so highly evolved in the unconscious and higher consciousness. But the ordinary people, what are they to do? You know, how are they to relate with God? How are they to find God? It's very difficult for them, actually, when you tell, just pray to God. Oh, they look around. Where? Oh, God's in everything. Oh, okay. God's in everything. Okay, God in everything. You see, it's so difficult. But the religions, they gave all these lovely forms, rituals, prayers, songs, and things you could offer, which was doable. A little flour, a little milk, a little incense, and we could do that, bring that and wave it, and then God receives that. And wonderful. Go home blessed. And it sounds funny, but there is something to it. I don't know if you've ever been to an Indian temple, but hey, it's so very powerful. It is one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had. Standing in line to meet Ma at a very, very rural Shakti Shakti temple. Standing in this long, long queue to meet Ma. And everybody's all revved up with devotion, repeating their prayer, and Ma's just around the corner, and they've got their flower and their coconut, and they're in the line. Oh, the energy in that line. Really, you feel like you're going up to heaven right then and there before you get to Ma. Yeah, it's palpable. It's palpable. You can't deny it. So, religion, sectarian period, all these things came in. And they were finally something for the people. Something for the people. The yogis didn't need it. The philosophers, they didn't need it. But hey, the simple people, what about them? They needed it. And so we find that. And that still is very, very popular. And then the modern period from 1700 until the present time. So this gives us a little framework. how yoga has evolved and why the different yogas that we find in our city and in our town and in the studios and centers is not the end-all and be-all of yoga. It's just, these are just forms that have taken hold today. And teachers teaching in those places have somehow clicked, connected, and they're able to give something from a tradition that they've learned from, in the same way that you will be able to, because we will make you able to. When you finally come out of here, you'll be able to teach from this tradition, and you will click with it and you will pass it on. And this is what we pass on. We try to give you, the whole thing, not just the superficial aspect. So this is a representation of the early, more spiritual areas of the world. So there were 4 main areas: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and China. These were the most spiritual cultures in the old world. And yoga, the development of yoga, took place more around the Indus Valley. This one here. Can you see that? And the Indus Valley is in between Pakistan and India, and it's interesting. It is the exact area where they're fighting,
Because of the knowledge?
Huh?
Because of the knowledge?
I don't know exactly, but it's been going on.
Because of the location.
They're not, because of the location, some power lines are there. They're Muslims and they're Hindus fighting. They don't know even yoga, many of them. But this is where yoga developed from the Vedic perspective, pre-Vedic and Vedic perspective, because the Vedic culture evolved and developed in the more northern area of India. The southern area of India is where Gondwana land attached and jammed up so that the Himalayas formed at the top. And then the south of India remained quite strongly tantric. And then with the sectarian period, those religions became very popular. The Shaivism, Shaktism, Vaishnavism, those. So this area of the Indus Valley, it is more related with the yoga of the Vedic and the Upanishadic period, more the Vedic. So Mohenjo-Daro, Mehrgarh, Harappa, these places, which they have recently, or fairly recently, excavated and looked at. So this is one of the excavations that they have done to show that yes, this place really did exist in very ancient times. And this is how the culture would look. Built on a river, so supported by, river travel and trade in that way. Simple architecture. And these are some sculptures from that time that they have found. And see, the one on the right, it is a yogi, maybe Shiva or some such. And then the earlier form of writing developed started to develop from this very area where, many yogis and rishis, teachers would have lived. And the yogic tradition wasn't the only body of practice in the Vedic time. The main practice was actually fire. You know, we perform Havan here? Yeah. The main practice of that time was Havan and Yajna. Worship of the divine, the nature, through fire. Feeling that fire is able to transmit the vibrations of the mantras, is able to transmit the offerings to the higher plane. And they used to gather in forest hermitages and practice almost every day. Fire worship. Fire worship is very ancient, from the most ancient times. You know, from the tantric period and on through, fire has been an important part of worship, in Europe as well. And then the Buddhist period. In the Buddhist period, there were just so many, many images made of one thing, the Buddha. The Buddha. So even today in India, you find so many images, they're just discarded. Because the Buddhism rose and then it came down again, it was replaced by the Vedic and the Upanishadic again. So they just discarded the Buddhism. But everywhere there were these images. And some of them are phenomenally large, like this one. But see, what does that represent when you see that image? Oh. What does that represent? See, it's an asana, of course. But when you look at that, what do you see?
Inner peace.
Samadhi.
Exactly. You see somebody inside, going inside, connecting with the self. So these images are really powerful. If you keep one in your house, it'll radiate that to you every day. Go inside, go inside, go inside. Truth is there, truth is there. Yeah. So, in the early days, can you see that? Oh yeah. In the early days, they didn't have TV and university lecture halls. The teachers also were not doctorate in this and doctorate in that. The teachers were somebody who actually had experienced something. And they had experienced something through their own effort and practice. And so they used to live in forests, quiet places, on mountains, by lakes and rivers, out of the towns, in what we call ashrams. And they used to go off into the forest or up on the mountain or into caves for days and days on end. Maybe they disappeared for 3 weeks, wouldn't come back home, back to the ashram. Or even 6 months, just meditating, meditating, meditating. And then, when they came back with some realization. They had realized something, they had gone somewhere inside themselves, they had mapped something, understood something, brought back a practice from there, a mantra, something. Many things maybe. There are jewels hidden in all of our consciousness. And they found those, brought them back, and then they sent out word. They would go running everywhere, bring all the disciples. I have something to teach. So, disciples would come from all over, walking, or on a bullock cart, or maybe a horse, or a donkey, or like that. They'd come. And when they came, they'd all sit around the teacher. Teacher would be under the tree. They'd sit all around, and the teacher would tell what he learned, what he saw, what he experienced, what he brought back. Maybe give them something from what he brought back. That was called spiritual learning. That was how they learned. And then, maybe after a few days sitting with the master, in this way, they'd go home and practice. That was their university. That was their qualification. Sitting with the Master, learning directly at his feet, from his experience. Of course, this is still learning from his experience. Then the disciple would go home and try to learn from his own experience what the Master had taught. Of course, some disciples didn't bother to do that. They just carried on with what the Master taught and tried to remember that. So, see, there's two types of knowledge, direct and indirect. One is that you learn from your own experience, and one is that you learn from somebody else's and you remember it. Yeah. Anyway, this is how yoga came to, you see. Yoga, it was taught like this. 1 to 1, 1 to 10, 1 to, but close, sitting around close. That's why when I walked in, I said, you've got to sit close. It's no good to sit all around. Oh. Oh well.
We can skip it.
There's a whole lot of blah, 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 blah. But I've tried to give you the essence of it. There's heaps of blah, blah. We could go along doing this for a week. We might think so, but I assure you the course director will not say so. Okay, let's just sit quietly for a few moments. Everybody gets what they need, right? And be aware of the living yoga in you. The power of yoga to live and thrive in you. And feel that you will be connected to all the facets of yoga through this living power of yoga in you. And feel gratitude for that. Feel a meaning and a purpose in that. And feeling this, we're going to chant the Om mantra all together 3 times. Please breathe in deeply. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.